The title of this lesson is From Protest to Revolution. A couple of questions we're going to explore. Number one, did all colonists want to fight a war with Britain? Number two, what were the different points of view on the conflict? And number three, how did the American Revolution begin? Where we last left off was the result of the Intolerable Acts, and the result of the Intolerable Acts was the First Continental Congress. Notice the word continental. When they're saying that, they're trying to point out that the American colonies are on an entirely different continent than Britain. So the word choice is really important, even in the names of these kinds of events. Congress is just a group meeting, right? So this group meeting took place in Philadelphia in 1774, and 12 out of the 13 colonies sent delegates or representatives. Georgia was the only one that did not. These delegates included John Adams, Samuel Adams, who was his cousin, John Jay, George Washington, and Patrick Henry. They demanded the repeal of the Intolerable Acts and called for the training of militias to stand up to British troops, and also demanded a boycott of British goods. So this event shows us that the colonists were really taking unity seriously and trying to move forward in more actions that pit the Americans against the British. The word militias, new vocabulary. These were non-professional soldiers. They fought because they believed in the cause. So a lot of these militia members were farmers and lawyers and teachers. John Adams had been a teacher at some point. But they joined together because they believed in America and they believed that the British were mistreating them, and it was important to them to stand up for their rights. And here it is, the First Continental Congress. You could see that's seems really informal, right? You notice a lot of people sitting over here on the floor. I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. Ben Franklin here talking and kind of leading the meeting. There seems to be a totally separate conversation going on over here. So there's a lot going on, but it seems to be a really exciting and informal meeting. The next major event is the shot heard round the world. When we say round, that's just a spoken shortening of the word around. So colonists began forming these militia units known as Minutemen. They were called Minutemen because they could be ready at a minute's notice. British General Thomas Gage learned that the Minutemen were storing arms or guns in Concord, and he sent 700 troops to seize those guns. Why had the British been in the colonies to begin with? Why was their army staying there? Yeah, if you had said something along the lines of to enforce the Proclamation of 1763, it really does go back that far, that military presence in the colonies. Paul Revere and William Dawes, who were two members of the Sons of Liberty, a group of colonists who joined together to fight against the British, set out to warn the Minutemen. And there's a really famous poem about that called Paul Revere's Ride. Not entirely historically accurate, but famous nonetheless. And if you guys are interested in the Level 3 reading station, you will get a chance to read that in class. 77 Minutemen waited in Lexington, Massachusetts for the British to arrive. A shot rang out. And no one knows who shot this. Historians will debate that, but it was the first shot of the American Revolution. 8 Americans were killed, and the British moved to Concord, where the battle continued. The Battle of Lexington and Concord is well known to be the first shot of the American Revolution. It was called the shot heard round the world because the impact that this war would have on other countries was also important. And there are some images of that famous ride. Even after Lexington and Concord, though, most colonists wanted to make peace with Britain. There was still this sense of loyalty that Britain was their home country, their mother country. They considered themselves to be Englishmen. So rather than going right into battle, as it would be later in the war, they met together at the Second Continental Congress to talk about the problem. But some of the decisions made here really pointed towards war. This occurred in 1775 in Philadelphia, and included some leaders like Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, and Ben Franklin. At this point, Congress is still divided. They chose George Washington to head the Continental Army and began printing separate paper money so that they would be prepared in the case of war. And there's some of these famous leaders. Benjamin Franklin is well known in Philadelphia. Thomas Jefferson, who at this point was pretty young, he was a statesman from Virginia. He would later be the third president of the United States. John Hancock, best known for being the first and largest signer of the Declaration of Independence. And George Washington, who many of you would know will be the first president of the United States. At this time, there are still different points of view out there on the conflict with Britain. Even some of the people who would be the most avid patriots still wanted to remain loyal. Some colonists did want war at this point, and others were still in between. So it was really an interesting time in the American colonies because there were so many viewpoints out there. We categorize these people into patriots and loyalists. Patriots are the term for colonists who wanted independence and would fight to get it. They controlled many local governments, especially up in New England, like Massachusetts. Most colonists were patriots at this point. You start to see a shift after 1775 where most people fall into this grouping. Boston was where many patriots met and organized together. On the other hand, we have the loyalists. These are colonists who remained loyal to the Britain and the king. 1/3 of colonists were loyalists in 1775, but they included some of the wealthiest families in the colonies. Those families, especially those southern plantation owners, worried that if there was a rebellion, that they might lose property or lose some of their financial wealth. Government officials who owed their jobs to British were also often loyalists, like colonial governors and tax collectors. Enslaved African Americans and Native Americans also sided with the British. Native Americans were worried that continued American expansion would lead to them losing their land. And a lot of enslaved African Americans were worried that the institution of slavery would continue under the American government. Whereas in England, we hadn't had slavery for some time, so having English leaders was kind of helpful to them. There's kind of a little cartoon of those points of view. However, some people still remained neutral. And why was that? Some people were opposed to war in general or avoided politics. Others were recent immigrants from countries like Ireland and Scotland and Germany who wouldn't have had any sense of loyalty to Britain. Others still identified with the king but just were torn because of all of these events that had occurred. One of the last steps here is the Olive Branch Petition. If you notice in the image let's do a little circle for you guys. The image right here, an olive branch is a sign of peace. It was a symbol to kind of extend the olive branch, means you're extending peace. So the colonists still hoped that there was a last chance for peace to be restored. They sent this petition which stated that the colonists are still loyal to the king, and they asked him to stop fighting and resolve problems peacefully. King George's response was really telling. He didn't answer the petition, but instead he declared the colonists in rebellion and sent 20,000 troops to America to end the revolt. And the American Revolution had begun.